I came to New York with a suitcase, a few $100, and a dream. And like most people with a dream, I thought I was going to crush it right away. But New York doesn't care about your dream. It tests you first, and it tested me hard. I ended up living in a rundown apartment in Brooklyn with no heat. Winter in New York without heat isn't romantic, it's survival. I slept with my coat on, a hat pulled down over my ears, and sometimes I could see my own breath inside the room. I'd wake up and my hands would be stiff from the cold. There was no hot shower to look forward to, no big breakfast to start the day. Just another morning, wondering how I was going to make it through the week. This was the kind of unemployment where your bank account is a countdown clock ticking towards zero, and there's nothing coming in to refill it. I took whatever odd jobs I could find just to keep the lights on, and sometimes I couldn't even manage that. But even in that desperation, there were jobs I refused to take. See, there's this pressure when you're struggling. People tell you to take anything. And anything usually means something that crushes your soul a little each day. It means stepping away from the thing you love because the rent is due, and you start convincing yourself you'll get back to your dream when the time is right. I knew if I went down that road, I'd never come back. So I held the line. I turned down work that made me feel like I was giving up on myself. That doesn't sound brave when you're sitting in a warm cafe with a full stomach. But when you're eating cheap noodles every night and you can't remember the last time you bought new clothes, that's a hard choice to make. Every no I gave felt like another brick in the wall between me and financial stability. But I also knew each no kept the door to my dream cracked open. I remember walking the streets of New York with resumes in my bag, stopping in at places that didn't even have, wanted signs. My shoes were falling apart, and every time I walked past a theater, I'd stare at the posters and think, I could do that if someone would just give me the chance. But the truth is, no one owes you a chance. You have to show up day after day, even when no one's looking, even when it feels like no one cares. That's the thing about those early days. They're lonely. You don't have cheering crowds when you're unknown. You don't have people telling you you're brilliant. You have yourself in a freezing apartment, asking if you're insane for thinking you can make it in this business. And you have to answer that voice every single day. I made a lot of mistakes back then. I missed auditions because I didn't have subway fare. I passed up work because it wasn't the right work, and then spent weeks wondering if I'd been a fool. I ate more peanut butter sandwiches than I care to admit. But all of that, every cold night, every empty wallet, every time I felt like giving up, that's the part of the story people don't see when they're clapping for you years later. Because here's the truth. The struggle is not the glamorous montage you see in movies. It's not inspirational music playing while you chase your dream. It's you against the creeping temptation to take the easy way out looks really good. But New York taught me something. If you can survive the days when no one knows your name, when your dreams are bigger than your bank account, and when the only heat in your apartment is from the stove you left on, then you can survive almost anything. Those years stripped me down to who I really was. There was no space for ego, no room for entitlement. Just me, stubborn as hell, refusing to let go of what I wanted. People talk about making it like it's a single moment, a big break that changes everything. But for me, making it started long before I was ever on a stage or a set. It started in that apartment, wrapped in blankets, telling myself that quitting wasn't an option. That's where the real work began. And maybe you're there right now, sitting in your version of that freezing apartment. Maybe you're staring at bills, wondering how you're going to make it another month. I get it. I've been there, and I'll tell you this. Those days are going to shape you in ways you can't see yet. They're going to give you a kind of grit that money can't buy. They're going to make you dangerous, in the best way. Because once you've learned to survive the worst, you're not scared of much anymore. That was my beginning. Glamorous, not pretty, but real. And that reality, those nights I thought I'd never get out, became the foundation for everything that came after. Without those days, I don't win Emmys. Without those days, I don't stand on stages. Without those days, I'm just another guy who gave up before he saw what he was capable of. So yeah, I started broke, cold, and unknown in New York City. But I stayed. I fought. And I learned that the struggle isn't the part you have to get through to reach success. The struggle is the training ground for success. When I first came to New York, I thought I was ready. I thought I'd step off the bus, walk into an audition, and within weeks I'd be working. I thought the city would somehow sense my hunger and reward me for it. But New York isn't a fairy godmother. It doesn't sprinkle magic dust on you because you showed up with a dream. It's more like a wall, tall, cold, and unmoving, and it stands there waiting to see how long you'll keep hitting it before you give up. My apartment was small. Not small like a cozy, small like you can touch the stove from your bed. The paint peeled off the walls in long curling strips, and in the winter, the cold found every crack in the building. There was no central heat, just an old radiator that coughed occasionally, but never actually got warm. I slept in layers, 2 sweaters, a coat, sometimes a hat, and I still woke up shivering. You could see your breath inside the apartment, which might sound poetic until you live it. It wasn't poetry. It was survival. Money was scarce. Scarce to the point where a cup of coffee was a decision. I didn't have a steady job. I didn't even have an unsteady job. I was unemployed, and it wasn't the kind of unemployment where you sit in a cafe with your laptop of figuring out your next step. It was the kind where your fridge is almost empty and the rent notice is slid under your door, and you start counting the days until the landlord knocks in person. Odd jobs where I could. A few hours here, a weekend there, but I refused to take the kind of work that would pull me too far from my reason for being there. People thought I was crazy for turning down steady pay. It's just for now, they'd say. But a just for now can turn into forever before you realize it. I knew if I took a soul-killing job to pay the bills, I'd end up staying in it. And every day I stayed, I'd get further from acting. That was the one thing I couldn't allow. Some days I walked the streets with resumes in my bag, dropping them off anywhere that looked like it might be hiring. Most of the time, they weren't. Sometimes they didn't even take the paper. I remember walking past theaters, staring at the posters, seeing faces of actors I'd never met but envied instantly. I thought I could do that if someone would just give me the shot. But nobody was giving me a shot. And the truth is, no one knows you won. That's the part people don't talk about. The invisibility. When you're unknown, you're invisible. You wake up every day, and the city moves around you like you're not even there. No one calling to tell you how talented you are. The only voice you hear is your own, and some days that voice is a bully. It asks, why are you still doing this? Do you think you're special? Do you think you're going to beat the odds? And the hardest part is answering that voice every single day with, yes, I do. I made sacrifices, not the glamorous kind that make for a nice Instagram post. Real sacrifices. I wore the same pair of shoes long after they should have been replaced. I ate cheap noodles for dinner more nights than I can count. I missed auditions because I didn't have the subway fare to get there. Each setback chipped away at my confidence, but not enough to make me quit. Quitting wasn't an option. And here's the thing, you don't realize in those moments that you're building something. It doesn't feel like building, it feels like barely hanging on. But every cold night in that apartment, every rejection, every day I chose not to walk away, those were bricks. And years later, when people looked at my career and saw success, I saw the wall I'd built from those bricks. The wall that kept me standing when things finally started to change. The struggle wasn't pretty, it wasn't romantic, but it was necessary. It stripped away any illusions I had about how this business works. It taught me that you don't wait for the perfect conditions to chase your dream. You chase it when the conditions are terrible. You chase it when it feels like you have nothing left. That's when you prove you really want it. So yes, I was broke. I was alone in a city that didn't care whether I stayed or went. But I stayed, or went. But I stayed. I stayed because even when the struggle felt endless, it was still mine. And holding on to that, holding on to myself, was the first real victory I ever had. Rejection isn't a single moment. It's not one big no that knocks you down and you get back up to prove them wrong. It's a steady drip. 1,000 little no's that come in every shape and size. Sometimes it's a polite email. Sometimes it's no email at all. Sometimes it's a casting director's glance that says everything before you've even opened your mouth. When I was starting out, rejection was the most consistent thing in my life. Showed up more than auditions did. It showed up more than paychecks did. If rejection had a frequent flyer program, I'd have been a platinum member. And at first, it's not just the rejection itself. It's what you tell yourself after. You start to think, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not what they're looking for. Maybe I'm not what anyone's looking for. The dangerous thing about constant rejection is how it tries to rewrite your own narrative. You walk into the room confident, ready to give everything you have, Then you hear a thank you in that clipped tone that really means you can go now. You walk out with a little less confidence than you had walking in. Do that enough times and you start measuring your worth by how many times someone else says yes to you. And in this business, that's a losing game. I had to learn not to take it personally. Not because I didn't care, I cared deeply, but because if I let every no hit me like a personal attack, I wouldn't survive a month. This wasn't about tough skin. Tough skin implies the blows don't land. They landed. Every single one. I felt them. But I learned to take the hit, breathe, and step back in the ring anyway. The truth is, I wasn't the kind of actor casting directors were used to seeing in lead roles. And in the beginning, that meant the parts I was offered, if I was offered any, were often stereotypes. They weren't written with dignity. They weren't written as people. They were written as punchlines. I said no to most of them. And saying no to bad work meant there were long stretches where I didn't work at all. It was brutal. You tell yourself that staying true to your principles will somehow speed things up, that the right role will appear any day now. But that's not how it works. Saying no meant doubling down on the grind. It meant years of small theater gigs, side hustles, and hustling for opportunities that often went nowhere. And yet, every rejection taught me something. Sometimes it taught me that I wasn't ready yet. Sometimes it taught me that I was ready, but the role wasn't mine to have. Sometimes it taught me that the business had blind spots, and I was going to have to work twice as hard to make them see me clearly. There's a moment that happens after you've been rejected enough times. A moment where you stop begging for permission. You stop thinking, please let me in, and you start thinking, I'm going to keep showing up, whether you like it or not. That shift doesn't make rejection easier, but it makes it less defining. Suddenly, a no is just one opinion, not a verdict. The persistence part isn't glamorous. It's not striding into a room with music swelling behind you. It's dragging yourself to yet another audition after a day job shift when you're dead tired. It's running lines on the subway because you don't have time to rehearse at home. It's showing up when the last thing you want to do is risk hearing a no again. And sometimes persistence means standing in the same spot, refusing to move backward. You're not climbing, you're not winning, you're just holding the line. That's not failure, that's survival. Every day you don't quit is a day you're still in the game. And staying in the game is the only way to eventually win it. I can't tell you how many times I walked into auditions thinking, this is the one. I'd prepare for days, give everything I had, walk out buzzing with adrenaline, and then never hear a word. Silence is its own kind of rejection. No feedback, no call, just emptiness. That silence can eat away at you if you let it. But I learned to let it pass. I learned to remind myself that not hearing yes today doesn't mean I'll never hear it. What kept me going was the belief, sometimes the barely there belief, that my work mattered. Even when it wasn't seen, even when it wasn't chosen, it mattered. Every monologue, every reading, every audition was sharpening the blade. Rejection was the grindstone, and the more I was rejected, the sharper I became. Years later, when opportunities finally started to come, I was ready. Not just because of my talent, but because I'd built a resilience that no quick success could have given me. That resilience was forged in the fire of all those no's. Persistence isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being breakable and still moving forward. It's about letting yourself feel the sting of rejection without letting it decide your fate. I didn't win every role. But I kept going, and that's why I'm here to tell you this. The people who make it are not always the most talented, but they are almost always the ones who didn't stop showing up. There's this myth about the big break. People think it's a single moment, one perfect role, one yes that changes your life forever. They picture a fairy tale shift. Yesterday, you were struggling, today you're famous. But the truth is, when the so-called a big break finally comes, it doesn't feel like a lightning strike. It feels like another step, another yes after 1,000 no's. The only difference is that this yes is loud enough for other people to finally notice you. For me, that step was the station agent. Before that role, I had been working. Sure, small plays, indie films, the kind of jobs that keep your craft alive but don't pay the rent. I'd been chipping away at the wall for years. And most days it felt like I was just making dust. It wasn't backed by a massive studio, but it was different. The role was written with dignity, complexity, a real human being, not a caricature. For the first time, I read a script and thought, they see me. landing that part wasn't magic. It didn't fall into my lap. It came after years of being the guy who showed up, who refused to go away quietly, who had a reputation for saying no to work that didn't respect the craft. It's about being ready when that shot comes. And I was ready, not because I was lucky, but because I'd been preparing for that moment in every freezing apartment, every empty theater, every room where the answer was no. When the station agent came out, something shifted. People started to notice my work. My name began to be mentioned in conversations it had never been in before. But here's the part people forget. Recognition is not security. A good role doesn't suddenly erase years of struggle. You still have to prove yourself again and again. Even after that film, there were gaps. There were weeks of nothing, months of waiting for the phone to ring. The work was better, yes. The scripts were better, but the grind didn't disappear. What changed was that I now had proof. Proof that the work I'd been doing in the dark had a place in the light. And that proof gave me fuel. Then came Game of Thrones. That role, Tyrion Lannister, wasn't just another job. It was a role that lived and breathed, that grew with me. It was layered, intelligent, flawed, and full of life. And most importantly, it was a role that people remembered. The kind that doesn't just put you on screen, but plants you in the minds of millions. Winning an Emmy for that role was surreal. Not because of the award itself. Trophies don't change who you are. It was a public acknowledgement of years of invisible work. It was a reminder of every winter in New York when I thought I wouldn't make it. Every time I stood in a casting room knowing I wouldn't get the part. Every moment I wanted to quit but didn't. That Emmy wasn't just for the role. It was for the persistence. But here's the thing. Beyond the breakthrough is just more work. The mountain doesn't end. The slope just changes. People assume that once you hit that level, the hard part is over. The pressure only grows. The choices you make matter more. The expectations get heavier. And the voice in your head, the one that asks if you're good enough, doesn't go away. It just learns new tricks. What I learned is that you can't live for the breakthrough. If you think the destination will fix you, you'll be disappointed. Because when you get there, you realize that it was never about a single role or a single award. It was about everything you had to become to get there. The discipline, the resilience, the refusal to compromise. That's the real reward. Beyond the breakthrough, I kept working. I kept choosing roles that challenged me, that treated me as a person, not a stereotype. I kept saying no when I had to, even when the stakes were higher. Because if you start betraying your principles once you've made it, you'll find yourself back at the start. Only this time with a bigger audience watching. The journey from that freezing apartment in Brooklyn to standing on an Emmy stage wasn't a straight line. It was 1,000 wrong turns, hundreds of closed doors, and a handful of doors that finally opened because I refused to stop knocking. And that's what Beyond really is. It's carrying the lessons from your struggle into the space you fought so hard to enter and never forgetting how you got there. So yes, I went from being unemployed in New York to becoming an Emmy-winning actor. But the real story isn't the leap from one to the other. It's every step in between. Every moment that looked like failure, but was actually progress. The breakthrough was just the point where everyone else could finally see what I had been building all along. Beyond, that's just me, still showing up, always showing up.